In a beautiful glade of white roses, a young man dares to make such a difficult decision for him, yet admits to his beloved that he has madly warm feelings for her, but the blonde and beautiful, like a princess girl, refuses the guy because she loves someone else. So she can't accept his feelings. Upon hearing this, the young man was shocked and didn't know what to say. He just watched the girl without finding words or comments. The main character was holding her phone, shaking with desperation. She was deeply disturbed by the fact that her favorite male character was rejected by the main heroine of the book, Eleanor. The girl did not understand why the author decided to give the heart of the main character to some Diego who appeared only in the middle of the story. And she absolutely did not understand why the author did not care about the feelings of the one who was with the girl next to her. All this time the girl tearfully sympathized with the rejected Leandro and did not understand why the author spent so much time describing his warm feelings for Eleanor, if in the end he was left with a broken heart. The girl sincerely sympathized with his character. The rejected guy is Leandro Cirillo Valaviti, and the life of this hero has been filled with pain and suffering from the very beginning. His parents' marriage alliance was solely for political purposes, and there was never any love between the Duke and Duchess in such an environment, where parents were more preoccupied with their own lives than with their son. Leandro was deprived of parental attention and love from birth. There was no question of any care at all. Love-starved child was the perfect phrase to describe this character. Until one event turned his life upside down. One day the boy woke up with a terrible pain and burning in his eyes. Despite the fact that it was daytime, he was sure that it was the deepest night, so in an attempt to call the maids, he asked them to light candles as soon as possible. When he turned at the woman's voice, everyone was horrified to find his own blood pouring from his eyes like tears. The parents searched everywhere for the cause, and their search led them to the temple, where the priest explained that a curse had been placed on the boy and this darkness would gradually consume him completely. The parents watched their child and did not grieve much, though they saw the poor boy suffering very well. All the husband cared about was the birth of a new heir, which he fiercely demanded from his wife, and ignored all her warnings that she was insanely long and hard to recover from the last birth. But the man continued to argue that she should calm down because she does not understand the situation in which their family is in the event of deprivation of an heir. Since that ill-fated day, the Duke had summoned many men to try to heal Leandro, but none of them had succeeded for a long time until a linguist who studied the subject of curses made a big discovery of the curse that had fallen on the boy. Unfamiliar in their homeland, the symbols covering more and more of the boy's face each day were the writing of the kingdom of Ambrose. Then the Duke and Duchess immediately invited the princess of that kingdom, Eleanor, as a guest to the ducal house. The little princess was introduced to the boy and asked to read what was written on the boy's face. But she was just a child, so she cried loudly and hid from him and called Leandro a monster. The boy looked in horror at the girl, who was frightened by the mere sight of him and could not find the strength to answer, for he thought himself so. That was how their first meeting took place. Because of all his experiences, the boy soon stopped leaving the estate, and his parents began to avoid their own son because of his ugliness. And so he lived for a long time, but after 13 years, Leandro and Eleanor met again. Although the girl did it out of sympathy for the guy, but still tried to get closer to him, but the lad, who at that time was already sufficiently scared both mentally and physically, rudely pushed the girl away from him, not wanting to see any more. And yet over time, touched by Princess Eleanor's persistence, Leandro opened his heart to her, and then the girl, with the help of her magical power, was able to cure him of a terrible curse. Leandro was finally free, and his heart, which had never known love before, was blinded by his savior. With tragedy of this narrative began precisely because of his unrequited love. The girl turned him down because of her feelings for Diego, who was the crown prince and the real protagonist of the novella. The guy, blinded by his love, could not dignify the girl's rejection, and so the only thing he could think of was that the girl had chosen Diego only because of his title of crown prince and the power he had. Then he decided to raise a revolution to at least that way to get the girl's favor and get, as he thought, the power she wanted, but his plan failed and he was executed for treason. The protagonist, still after impressions from reading, did not understand what was the moral of this novel and did not know why the author did not allow Leandro, as far as the end of his life, to know happiness. The girl, crying sincerely, thought that if she was near him in this piece, she could make him happy. After much sobbing, she woke up in the body of a maid who washed floors. Then the girl decided that perhaps her prayers had been answered. The girl, performing her duties, reflected on what had happened. The protagonist did not understand how it happened that she fell asleep in tears because of the novel and woke up in the body of a maid who washes floors. The girl pinched herself, trying to awaken from her dream, but found that it was quite real and she felt physical pain. Then she looked at her clothes and realized that the coat of arms of the Velavite family to which Leandro belonged was embroidered on her uniform. She was horrified to think that everything was happening exactly as it had in the classic novel about girls who found themselves in another world. She was brought out of her musings by a girl who called out to her and then asked indignantly how long Evelina planned to clean the outhouse. The girl didn't realize who she was at first, so she began to scrutinize her in an attempt to identify her. The talking girl who resented the protagonist's lack of response had bright red hair and slanted eyes, just like Leandro's clerk Anna. The girl realized with horror that apparently she was really in the body of the maid from the novel, and then wondered what time period she was in, so she stood up abruptly and began to ask Anna how old the young master was. Anna obviously did not understand such a question and thought that the girl was probably ill, but nevertheless said that the young master had just turned 13 the day before yesterday. The girl excitedly thought that since Leandro was still a child, so everything leads to the prologue of the story. Anna, obviously in a hurry to get somewhere, quickly told Evelina that if she had finished cleaning, she should go to the main building to the kitchen because there was a great need for help, and then hurriedly ran out the stairs. Evelina took advantage of the moment of peace and decided to remember what had happened to Leandro at the age of 13. The girl realized that if everything went according to the plot of the novel, the boy had already received his marks, and around this time, he spent all his days bedridden and suffering from severe pain and unbearable migraines. By this time, the boy was already considered unstable because of his excessive aggression towards others, which was not surprising considering all that the boy had to endure on a daily basis. The girl looked back at Anna and began to remember that she had not been given much time in the novel, and the only important event was her breaking into Leandro's room to steal valuables. Then the girl realized that the boy did not call the servants in a voice but rang a bell, and now she did not hear such a sound. Glancing over at the obviously restless Anna, she thought that perhaps now was the moment for the theft to take place, and Evelina realized that she should obviously intervene. Then calling Anna, she said that Mistress Iron was looking for her. The girl told the protagonist to be quiet because the young master had just fallen asleep and might wake up. The girl looked at the disgruntled Anna and sensibly pointed out that she was the one shouting the loudest. When she came downstairs to go to her mistress, she angrily poked the girl in the shoulder and called her stupid. But she looked at Anna's footsteps and thought that she was much worse, but said nothing out of reason. And then she thought that this time she had saved Anna from stealing, but one day she would not be able to help her and she would be caught and punished. But she was brought out of her thoughts by the sound of the bell. She hurried up the stairs and told the young gentleman that she had heard him and would be there soon. When she found herself near the door, she knocked a little nervously. She didn't know what to expect, so she wasn't quite ready. When the boy allowed her to enter, she went in and saw a little haggard child sitting on his bed looking in her direction. The girl looked around his room and found that all this time no one had been watching and caring for him at all, because all the things were scattered and it was obvious that his room had not seen a full cleaning for a long time. Then Leandro said that he got very hot and wants to take a bath, but he does not need help with these, so he asked the main character to draw a bath for him and prepare everything necessary. The girl quickly oriented herself and asked the young gentleman to wait for a while so that she could prepare everything. Seeing his curse-stricken face, the girl admitted that her heart ached for the boy and promised herself that, even if it was all a dream, she would still try to do everything she could for Leandro, and then left. When she returned to report that his bath was ready, she saw the boy, full of determination, try to get up to go to the bathroom on his own, but his whole body was shaking as it was severely weakened by the illness. In the end, just one awkward movement was enough for the boy to drop the cup of water on the floor and fall. The water spilled around him and splinters were lying all around him. Evelina immediately ran over to help him and asked if he was hurt badly with the man. To the girl's surprise, yelled at her not to touch him. She complied with his request, and then she shifted her gaze to the shards lying around him and informed him that he might hurt himself if she didn't help. But the man shouted angrily at her, ordering the girl to leave as soon as possible and leave him alone. That unhappy looking at the boy realized that even despite their difference in social status, it does not mean that Leandro can so calmly yell at a man who really wants to help him and then resented the fact that absolutely nothing bad to this little rascal did not do. Then she silently lifted him to his feet and ran into his disgruntled face, which was seething with anger. The boy fiercely continued to order her not to touch him and to let him go. But the girl lifted him from the floor and, holding him above the ground so that he would not hurt himself, told him that if he stepped on a glass and hurt himself, the girl would be punished for it. And then, looking at the boy, she asked him if he really wanted the girl to be punished just because she was not to his liking. The boy, unhappy to be in her grip, said that she was talking nonsense and asked who she was, but they had not met before. The girl gently set him on his feet and awkwardly informed him that she was a maid, that she worked in this house. The boy noticed the uncertainty in her voice and face and wondered if she was really just a maid. Meanwhile, Evelina reasoned that Anna had addressed her by her first name, but unfortunately she couldn't remember anyone with the same name, so it was more likely that she had become one of the characters in the crowd. Leandro then informed her that she was free to go, but the girl didn't back down and holding the boy by the shoulders informed him that she was worried he might not make it safely, so she said she would walk him to the bathroom. The boy tried to get out of her hands, but immediately staggered and almost fell, and Evelina began to notice that such behavior to her from the child begins to irritate a little, but did not give up and took him in his arms. Leandro shouted at her unhappily and asked what she was doing, and then said that she must have some limit to her ignorance and ordered him to let him go this very minute. But the girl calmly explained that he shouldn't shout like that, otherwise he would damage his vocal cords and his throat would hurt. And then she added that the bathroom was not far away, and she would take him there, but if he continued to resist like that, they would not get there. The boy told the girl to let him go at once, for everyone around him says that if you touch the young master, you'll immediately contract a curse. The girl looked sadly at the small child shaking in her arms. She knew the curse wasn't contagious and couldn't understand why she was so upset, and assumed it was because she had read the novel earlier. So they got to the bathroom and the boy walked along the wall because of his poor eyesight to the bathroom. But suddenly a small chair was in his way, so that the child could reach the sink. He bent down to soothe the pain in his leg, and the girl looking at him suggested that perhaps if Leandro is always so clumsy, he has a lot of bruises all over his body. Then the protagonist realized that the boy would never ask her for help on his own. So she walked over and reached out to him, but the boy sensed what she was about to do and ordered her not to touch him. She said she'd touch him and help him anyway, because at this rate, he'd hurt something today, not bathe. But the boy turned to her and angrily informed her that the girl had no manners and no sense of tact. The girl laughed awkwardly, and the boy angrily informed her that it was not a compliment at all, but rather the opposite. Then the boy looked at her angrily and wondered if the girl was behaving like that because she was sorry, and that's why she was clinging to him now. The boy was very surprised to hear the girl's sincere reply that she was really sorry for him, but there was no mockery or anything else in her tone, only genuine regret. The boy gave in to her insistence and allowed her near him, but still asked her not to touch him. The girl was glad that he'd agreed, and having fulfilled his request, began to help him unbutton his jacket, but did it as gently as possible so as not to create discomfort. Then the girl was shocked to discover that his curse had already paralyzed his little body for 10 years and directly affected his body, so at his 13 the boy's body was completely out of proportion to his age. His scars looked very painful. It was obvious from one look how much discomfort Leandro had been experiencing all this time. But the protagonist admitted that from their presence he didn't look like a monster at all. Not even the slightest bit. She tearfully thought that the boy was still very young, and Evelina promised to do her best to take care of him. The boy climbed into the bathroom and asked her to hand him some towels, but the girl awkwardly asked where they were. Then Leandro immediately realized that everything was useless and simply asked her to be quiet. When the boy had just had time to relax in the warm water, the girl asked where their bathroom supplies were. He grudgingly replied that they should be near the wash basin. When the girl found them, she asked where the towels were. The boy grudgingly pointed out that the girl had 2 keen eyes, so she could look for them herself, as they were all nearby. The girl found them and said that he was completely right. Then the girl smilingly asked if the young gentleman knew that he was considered unstable by everyone. The boy furiously asked where the girl had lost her sense of tact. But then I decided to look at the depressed and subdued protagonist. Going through her closet. By then, she had taken everything she needed and approached the bathtub to help him bathe. When he noticed it, he angrily ordered her to stay away from him. She explained with a calm face that she needed to help him wash and promised that she would not touch the boy directly. But he waved his hands and shouted in worry that she might be infected by him. Then the girl grabbed his hand and, sitting down near his bathroom so that he could see her face, told him that his curse was not contagious and nothing bad would happen to her, and then raising her voice to shout to the boy, which surprised him to no small degree. The protagonist said that the contagiousness of his curse was a complete lie, and he himself should know about it, since doctors and magicians and absolutely everyone who worked with him had said more than once that the curse could not be so easily transmitted. And then, seeing his shocked face, I asked why the boy was proving the opposite. The boy frightenedly inquired how the girl could know about it, but the girl informed him that she just knew about it and that was all. And then she moved closer to the boy and smiled sweetly, asking if he could see her. The boy, in whose large eyes the protagonist's face was so clearly visible, reported that he saw her very blurred. Then the girl, still kneeling beside him, watched the boy carefully. He awkwardly and uncertainly asked if he could touch her. She gave Leandro her consent with tenderness and joy. Afterwards he asked if the girl was not afraid of being infected by the curse, but she calmly and with a smile asked why the boy continued to lie to her. The boy tentatively reached out his small hands to the face of the protagonist, and after mesmerized trying to look at her face, he thought that her skin was very warm. Then the girl comfortingly touched his shoulder and looked at him intently. But suddenly from that touch the boy's body shuddered. The girl was afraid that she might have hurt Leandro badly, so she asked him how he was feeling, but he assured her that he was fine. Leandro tried to explain the reason for his consternation, but afterward changed his mind and asked the maid to give his name and introduce herself normally. The girl hesitated, not knowing how to answer, and then said questioningly that it seemed to be Evelina, and then smiled and explained that she didn't have a surname, as she was a commoner. Maybe she did have a surname, but the girl didn't know it, so that was the best excuse. The boy awkwardly turned away from her and said that the girl was behaving very strangely. She did not respond to this, and looking at the young gentleman thought that she was very lucky that Leandro was socially maladjusted, because if it were otherwise, she would have been punished for her behavior more than the usual punishment. The girl sighed loudly and then reflected that Leandro's character was quite complex, but the boy could be understood as he had a life deprived of love and attention. The protagonist asked the boy if she could help him bathe, but he was a savvy child and immediately noticed her dejected tone. The girl confessed that she thought the young gentleman would refuse her again, since earlier he had resisted her lifting him in her arms. But the boy looked at her seriously and said he wouldn't mind her help. The protagonist was insanely happy about his agreement and jumped to her feet with joy. Seeing such strange behavior from the maid, Leandro smiled weakly, which did not go unnoticed by Evelina. But the boy quickly explained that he only laughed at the girl and nothing more. On this, the main character sarcastically reported that the guy just has a wonderful character. Afterwards, she started washing him. The girl was washing his fragile body and immediately noticed that the boy was very tense, so she turned to the young master and asked him to try to relax a little. But afterwards she remembered with horror that his curse not only disfigures him externally, but also causes great physical pain, which Leandro has to constantly endure and not give the appearance. She was brought out of her thoughts by the voice of a boy who asked her to stop. The girl wanted to argue and say that she was not finished yet, but Leandro cut off all attempts to persuade him and said that he was very tired and wanted to rest, so he asked to give him a dry towel. Then the girl waited for the boy to get out of the bath and helped him put on a robe to keep him warm and dry his head with a towel. The young gentleman awkwardly asked the girl to lead him to his room, but insisted that she not lift him because it was too uncultured. Evelina happily agreed to such terms, and then the boy tentatively held out his hand to her, as if afraid of this unfamiliar feeling. When they came to the room, the young gentleman asked Evelina to give him some clothes, but the girl did not know where she was, so she asked uncertainly. The boy was angry that she didn't know anything at all, and didn't understand how she was allowed into the mansion with such a level of training. And the girl awkwardly informed him that the man should tell her everything once, and she would remember everything and know in the future. Leandro told her the whereabouts of his things, and then watched her searching for them unhappily. He was well aware that the girl was very problematic, but he did not tell her about it. Evelina took the young gentleman's clothes and at his request put them on his bed, so that he could put them on when he wanted. She also warned him that she had also put his underwear so that he would not have to go for it. Then she looked at the floor and found the splinters not cleaned and decided to ask Leandro if she could come and clean his room in the morning. He asked emotionlessly what was the point of it, since because of his blindness he would still walk around and scatter everything. But the girl happily informed him that she wanted to clean, because Leandro was in a dusty room all day long, which was very bad for his health. And then she enthusiastically continued that if she cleaned his room every day, he would not have time to scatter everything, so everything would be fine. The boy noted nothing on this, and with some childish anger and harmfulness reported that Evelina is very noisy. But she was not offended by such words, because she knew that the reason is that Leandro does not know how to accept other people's help, so the protagonist strongly wanted to fix it. Picking up the shards, she said goodbye to him and walked out the door. The boy didn't say anything, just silently walked her to the door, and then thought that everything that had happened today was for the first time for him. As they walked to his room, Leandro told the girl that it was the first time anyone had ever seen him off, and also the first time anyone had allowed him to touch himself. The girl heard this and wondered how many more tears she would shed looking at the child's mangled fate. The girl was angry at herself for not being able to help him. The girl, standing outside his bedroom door, turning to God, prayed to him that Leandro could become happy, and wept bitterly because of such a hard lot of the young master. On leaving the room, all the interesting things of the girl's evening had just begun, and it began with a fight with Anna, who was shouting and angry, for Lady Iron had not called her at all, and because she had come there she was heavily loaded with work, which she was not happy about. The girl, awkwardly looking at the fiercely shouting girl, apologized for her mistake, and the girl threatened that if such a thing happens again, she will not do it only by shouting. After the protagonist was in her room alone, she thought that Anna has a terrible character, but she was pleased that because of the girl's displeasure and the fact that she decided to talk to her, Evelina was able to find her room with her help. Then the girl decided to go to the mirror to look at herself for the first time in a while. She found that she looked completely different and was in the body of a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Evelina admitted to herself that she had been so busy with Leandro that she had completely forgotten that she had reincarnated and become one of the heroines of the novel's cast. Then the protagonist decided to think logically about how she could have ended up in this place and began to remember everything that had happened step by step. The girl was reading a novel on her phone before entering this world, and at the end of it she was in tears because of the unfair treatment of Leander. And then she fell asleep. The protagonist realized with annoyance that she was completely unaware of what had happened, as she had never been the type of person who was prone to deep analysis. So she decided to just go with the flow, as it seemed the most logical thing to do right now. It was a new day, and Evelina went to the young master's room in the morning, taking everything she needed, but no one answered her knock. Then the girl excitedly began to knock louder, but again receiving no answer, she asked Leandro why he was in the room and did not answer her, but he only grudgingly allowed her to enter. The girl came into the room and put the blankets on the chair, saying that she had good hearing, so she could hear him clucking unhappily when she came in. Then she turned back to the boy. He sat silently on his bed and stared into the void, not knowing what to say to such a remark. When the girl looked around, she saw that he had accidentally spilled his water again. The sight made her sad, but she didn't let it show. She went to the curtains to let the sunlight into the room. As soon as she touched them, a cloud of dust escaped from beneath the fabric. The girl coughed and said in a voice that it was very dusty in the young master's room. But the man looked in her direction and told her that she complained too much about nothing. The girl turned to him unhappily and wondered how the boy could have survived all this time in such a filthy room. But he coldly explained that sometimes other maids came to him to clean the room. But when she tried to find out when the last time the room had been cleaned, the girl received an indifferent "I don't remember." Then she went out onto the balcony and opened the doors wide, explaining that she should air the room and open the windows if the weather permitted. Evelina, not getting any octet from the young gentleman, moved closer to his bed and asked the boy to move to the couch while she changed her bedclothes, but he began to resent her for not telling him what to do. Then the protagonist chose a different tactic. And as convincingly as she could, she asked the young gentleman if he would like to rest on such a marvelous sofa. But her hidden sarcasm did not go unnoticed, and the boy angrily told her to stop behaving like that. Then the girl, when she realized that he was not going to get up, came closer to him, and the boy asked her what she was going to do, and she simply replied that since young Mr. Leandro did not want to leave the bed, she would roll him on her back and carry him to another place. Leander's indignation at what he heard was unbounded, and he shouted angrily that he was not a child and that she should not behave like that. The girl looked at him attentively and asked if perhaps he wanted her to carry him in her arms, but the boy said angrily that he was able to walk on his own. Looking at Leander's evil, cute face, the protagonist reasonably noted that he might fall, and then informed that yesterday while bathing she noticed many abrasions on his body because of such unsuccessful walks. Leandro, in spite of all his displeasure, agreed with her and afterward asked her to help him walk as yesterday, but by no means to carry him in her arms. The protagonist smiled happily and glowed from what she heard and agreed to fulfill his request. When the boy found himself on the couch, he wanted to lie down on it to rest, but grudgingly bumped into a rolled-up blanket. Then Evelina explained that it was just a sheet and said she couldn't remove them as the floors were dirty, and so the young gentleman would have to wait a little while she remade the bed. The boy asked angrily how much longer the girl planned to boss him around, and informed him that she was acting like a horrible maid. The girl thought the boy was acting like a grumpy old grandfather and explained to Leander that she was doing it all for his own sake. Afterward, she decided to find a way out of the situation and brought him his pillow. The boy groped her tentatively and afterward lay down peacefully. While Evelina was cleaning, she thought about the fact that she felt quite unusual because of the presence of someone else during her cleaning in the room. The girl sadly noticed that the boy does not happen to her at all, angry and criticizes a lot, but to the surprise of the protagonist, she was not angry at all. She finished her robot and turned to the boy to tell him that he could go back to his bed, but turning around she noticed that he was sleeping peacefully. Evelina scrutinized the little boy and thought that when he slept he looked very cute, like an angel. She covered him with a blanket to make him feel better and keep him warm. The girl decided that while he was asleep it would be a good idea to clean up. When she was done, she saw that the room was shining clean and wondered if she had overdone it. But suddenly the girl noticed that the young gentleman began to fall off the bed. She immediately ran over to help him and at the last moment managed to pick him up in her arms. At that moment, Leandro woke up and saw that the girl was holding him. When she saw the boy's excited face, she was happy to see him awake. But the next moment he pushed her away from him and then pressed himself into the couch. Evelina clearly did not like this behavior and expressed her displeasure, but Leandro was just frightened and asked why she was touching him and who gave her permission to do so. The young gentleman quickly got up from the couch and headed towards his bed, and the girl worriedly tried to explain that she wanted to help. But the only response she got was a boy yelling at her that he didn't need the protagonist's help. And then he hid under his blanket from the protagonist, to her great surprise and shock. The girl realized that she should not be with Leandro now, as he was clearly aggressive, so she asked the young gentleman if she should go out. But expectedly she didn't get any answer and so she left. She stood with her back against the door and thought about the fact that the boy was very difficult to work with because he didn't know how to ask for help and was very resistant to it. The next day, Evelina was doing her chores in the garden, and when she finished cleaning she thought she should go and check on Leandro, but suddenly she heard a noise and turned around to check what was going on. 3 girls were coming toward her, asking for help with their work. The first one ran up and asked Evelina to help with the laundry, the second one claimed she needed more help in the main building, and the third one, who could barely keep up with them, asked for help in the kitchen. She watched the maids arguing with each other and couldn't decide which of them needed her help more. Evelina looked at them in shock and didn't understand why they wanted her to help them. The girls decided to bet on a rock, scissors, paper who will go to help the protagonist, and the one in being mixed feelings did not understand why they did not even ask her opinion, but still she had to help, and in the end she was sitting in the kitchen helping with peeling potatoes and thinking that no matter how much she tried to persuade them that she needed to go to the young gentleman, it didn't save her. Then the protagonist thought that probably the Evelina she had become was a very skillful girl, so everyone wanted to get her help. She was suddenly brought out of her musings by another maid who asked in a friendly way if she was doing her job. Evelina reassured her that it wasn't hard and then asked her why she was doing so much work today. Then the maid decided to tell the girl what happened because she had not heard about it before. She leaned over to her ear and whispered conspiratorially that instead of overseeing the running of the estate, the Duchess was vacationing at tea parties and auctions, so she was on constant travel. And after the girl explained that things had become quite sad as the Duke also left and went on a business trip. But after she calmed the main character and said that soon will arrive new maids who will help them with the work. The girl reasonably wondered when exactly that would happen. All week the main character was engaged in cleaning and washing, helped drying laundry, washed the floors and worked tirelessly, while the boy sadly sat all alone as she could not see him anymore. On the 6th day, Leandro stood at the window, looked sadly into the distance and remembered how good he was with Evelina, although the first time was really very unusual and noisy. But despite all her disadvantages, the girl really cared about him. But suddenly Evelina, who was finishing her work in the garden, was called over. It was Mrs. Irene, who came closer and asked rhetorically if the girl had noticed how much work had appeared, and then added that she should be patient a little more, because the maids were on their way to their estate and should arrive any day now. And then Mrs. Irene added that from the next day the girl would take care of the young master. She calmed the girl down and told her that she would assign someone else to take care of her. Afterwards, she asked the girl to eat and wash, and then she would wait until she was called. The girl, shocked, thought she could finally see Leandro every day. But Mistress Irene, misrecognizing her emotions, apologized for the difficulty and said that it was the young master's order. Then she said that she was aware of the rumors about the young master's curse, but said that it was not transmitted through touch, so the girl could not worry. The girl calmly informed Irene that she knew that the curse was not dangerous to others, and then she thought that she knew about it because she was already with him and touched him, and then smiled at her thoughts and happily remarked that until the day of the boy's release from the curse came, they would be near each other every day, and the girl would help him in every possible way. And after running madly joyfully to the manor, Evelina thought that tomorrow would finally be the day of their next meeting. It's been 3 days since the protagonist became the young master's personal maid, but in all that time he has never called him. The girl was angry, but resolutely promised that she would wait outside his room for 24 hours a day until she heard his bell ring. When the girl brought Leandro breakfast, he every time looked at Evelina with such an expression as if he did not understand why she came. It was already evening of the 4th day, and no matter how much she waited, the young master never called her. Then the protagonist clenched her fist and thought that tomorrow she would definitely make him eat something. Morning came and the girl brought the boy some food, but he habitually replied that he had no appetite and turned away from his breakfast. The girl took one croissant from his plate and showing it to the boy, said that she could not believe that the young gentleman did not want to eat at all. And then she began to describe the brilliantly prepared croissant in her hands and suggested that he close his eyes and try to take a bite. The boy with a jeering look at her suggested she eat it herself since she liked it so much, but the girl didn't ask twice and actually ate it. The boy was shocked to see Evelina finishing his croissant and thought that he had never met such maids as her before. The girl laughed and moved closer to Leandro and said that it was mutual because she had never met a gentleman like him. Afterward, she said that she could put jam on the croissant to make it tastier for the boy, but he grudgingly told her to be quiet and let him eat in peace. In the end, he did do as the protagonist asked and ate, and the girl sat contentedly watching him, satisfied that everything had worked out. Then she decided to ask him if she was his personal maid or not, but he coldly informed her that she was very noisy and gave him a headache. The girl came closer to him and noticed that Leandro really didn't look well and assumed he had a fever. And then, without warning, she moved closer and touched her forehead to his to check his body temperature. The boy was shocked, for the other maids had never allowed themselves to do such things, but the protagonist didn't seem to notice his emotions until the moment he started to break free. The girl calmly informed him that he did have a high fever. Then she loosened her grip and realized it was time to stop shortening the distance without warning and apologized for her action. But suddenly the boy grabbed her sleeve and quietly, barely audibly and very embarrassed, apologized for the time he chased her away, after which she didn't show up for a week. The girl did not know what to say and just looked at him, but Leandro noticed this silence and turned to the protagonist in order to find out the reason, and also said that for her this is not peculiar because usually she is very loud, but suddenly became silent. The girl looked at him admiringly and recognized that it was a very nice apology, and she couldn't find the words to react normally. But the boy frowned and told her to stop acting like that, because he thought she was overplaying her hand. But she sincerely tried to explain herself and said that she thought his apology was very nice. And after shining with joy said that although he apologized just now, but he spoke too quietly, and because of this she did not hear anything and asked to repeat it again. But he looked away from her with embarrassment and said quietly that he didn't want to apologize again. The girl realized that he must be really embarrassed or ashamed of his behavior, so she decided to change the subject and asked him if he should give her his medicine and asked where it was. But that boy refused, and when asked by the girl to explain the reason, he told her to just put her hand on his head because it was so much better for him. The girl glowed with joy and agreed while the girl kept her hand on the boy's forehead. He told her that the doctor would be here soon, so there was nothing to worry about. And Evelina excitedly said that she hoped that nothing serious had happened to the young gentleman and that he would soon feel better. Then Leandro turned his head to her, but did not open his heavy eyelids and asked if the protagonist was so worried about him, and she immediately assured him that she was. Then the young gentleman opened his eyes and said that many people over his life had pitied him, but no one had ever told him they were worried about him. The girl, looking at her reflection in his childishly large eyes, convinced him that she was genuinely worried about him, but he replied that he knew and saw it. She saw the little haggard face of the boy who had suffered from the curse and thought that she wished his eyesight would improve so that he could see others. She was sure it would make him feel a little better about the world, but suddenly the boy opened his eyes abruptly and jumped up, wiping them. The protagonist looked at him fearfully and tried to find out what caused the boy's reaction. He grasped the girl's collar with horror and fear in his eyes, trying to find out why. Despite the fact that he had taken nothing, Leandro could see her face so clearly. But the girl suggested that perhaps it was because he was now close to her face. Leandro said that even at a distance he could see everything clearly. The girl clapped her hands in delight and said that this was wonderful news and apparently his medicine had begun to work, but the young gentleman said he had not taken it. Then the girl, still trying to find excuses, thought that maybe his medication worked with a cumulative effect and that's why it was now suddenly working. But the boy informed that it was impossible as he had not drunk them all his life and then got angry. He grabbed her roughly by the collar and pulled her closer to him and yelled at her to confess what she had done to him, but the girl sat there in shock, unable to find the words. And then she spread her arms in surprise and asked in genuine shock if it was her fault. And then she wondered if the words she'd said might have had that effect. She reached closer to the boy to touch his face. He watched in shock as her hand came to rest on his. The main character looked at the shaking child and jumped up to go to him and help him. The main character looked at the shaking child in horror and jumped up to go to him and help him. But the man looked at her angrily and ordered her not to touch him and to get out of his room. The boy grabbed her by the hem of her dress and dragged the girl to the exit. She followed, trying to find out the reason for such behavior on his part. The boy grabbed her by the hem of her dress and dragged her out, trying to find out the reason for his behavior. Eventually, the doors were slammed in front of her, and she stayed outside the door trying to get a hold of the young gentleman. It is not known how much time passed, but evening came. The protagonist did not leave her seat, so that if the young master needed her help, she would be there for him. When she heard the bell, she was glad that even though the boy had kicked her out, he still needed her. She took everything she needed and put it on a tray and went to his room. But when she opened the door, the protagonist found the boy flushed with fever, who was obviously very ill. Then the girl carefully, so as not to scare him, came closer and told him that she realized he wasn't feeling well, but he still needed to eat and take his medicine so he wouldn't get worse. The girl touched his forehead with her hand and felt a strong heat coming from his body. The girl worriedly suggested that he eat a couple of spoonfuls of soup, at least 5, to give his body strength, but he exhaustedly said he wouldn't eat. The girl tried to get up and said she would be back soon with food, but then she was suddenly grabbed by Leandro's small hands. He looked at her as unhappily as he could and then repeated that he didn't want to eat and didn't need any medicine. He hugged the girl's arm and asked her to stay quietly by his side until he felt better. She crouched on her knees beside his bed and watching him, wondered if he was hot in that room. But he smiled peacefully and pressed his hand against hers, asking her to be quiet, and she complied. The main character saw all this suffering, but realized that all she can do for him is just to be around as long as necessary, as well as changing compresses on his head to reduce the fever. It was late at night and the girl opened her eyes in shock, realizing that she had fallen asleep with her head on the boy's bed. She looked at him worriedly to make sure he was okay, but she found the child sleeping soundly. Then the girl took off his compress and touched his forehead and realized that his fever had gone down, so the worst was over. She looked at her watch and found that she had been in his room for a very long time, and then she thought that if Leandro was all right, she could go back to her room in peace. The girl began to fall asleep as suddenly plunged into a dream world, where she was in a delightful airy dress and around her was a field of sunflowers, which were so many that you could not see neither end nor edge. But then she saw a handsome, dark-haired man. He was not facing her, but he told her that he had been waiting for her all this time. Then a young man stood opposite the girl, so that she could see him open his mouth to say something. The girl immediately realized that it was Mr. Leandro, but she couldn't hear anything because she opened her eyes sharply from a piercing scream. The girl got up in bed and could not understand what a strange dream she was having, and then she remembered the screams that woke her up. When she realized that something must have happened, she rose abruptly and left the room at once. 2 maids were already at her door, calling excitedly for her. Evelina saw them and asked if anyone else had heard someone screaming. Both agreed and said that the screaming was coming from the main staircase. Then the protagonist said that they should go there as soon as possible because someone might be hurt. The 3 of them ran and saw the maid lying down and moving about. It was Anna. The protagonist in her hands immediately noticed a beautiful and obviously expensive necklace. Then Evelina realized that Anna had decided to steal the jewels after all. Just then she heard someone's footsteps from upstairs, and one of the men gathered below asked the young gentleman what had happened here. He looked confidently at the speaker and said that it was nothing special. Evelina looked at him excitedly, thinking that he had come out all alone and had been able to walk for so long, and then she thought that perhaps he was a little better after waking up. One of the maids, holding a lot of jewelry, asked the master to pay attention. Then she said that it seemed that Anna had tried to steal them. The girl also said that such a blatant case should be reported to Mrs. Iron immediately. By this time, one of the maids had already managed to run after her, so they ran back to the scene together. Mistress Iron saw Anna and sat down on her knees to make sure that she was alive, and then scolded her for such behavior and asked her quietly why she had done such a thing to the young gentleman who had done nothing to her. And afterwards, she explained to Anna that in such a situation, there was absolutely nothing she could do to help her, as she had been caught stealing. At these cries, 2 men came in. The man had no sooner come in than he immediately asked what had happened. The girl looked carefully at the newcomers and realized that their appearance matched the description in the book of Leandro's parents. The Duchess looked around at everyone gathered and asked what had happened. Then Mrs. Iron got down on one knee and asked to be forgiven for all that had happened, and said that the foolish child had tried to steal jewelry from the young master's room. The woman looked at her without emotion and asked if they had decided to make a big fuss over one thief. Then she told him to throw water on her and chase her out of the manor. The boy listened silently as his mother reacted with such disregard to the fact that her own son had been robbed. Afterwards, he looked her in the eye with the same scrutiny. She responded by giving him a displeased and contemptuous look, and then abruptly turned around and walked outside. Then Leandro was approached by his father, the Duke, who told him not to make a fuss about something as silly as this. He was obliged to deal with such things on his own without disturbing others. Evelina covered her mouth with her hand to keep from shouting anything unnecessary. She didn't understand what was wrong with his parents and how they could be so cold to their own son. After all, they were even more merciful to the servants than they were to him. The boy was not displeased, for he was used to all this. He bowed and apologized for disturbing them, and promised to be more careful in the future. The Duke looked at him angrily and ordered him and everyone else to return to their rooms. The girl looked at the departing men and did not understand why they were both looking at Leandro with such dislike. The protagonist realized that, to all appearances, they were completely indifferent to him. She saw in the boy who was silently staring after them a defenseless, unhappy, frozen 13-year-old child. By the time Anne's wounds were healed, the girl had helped her pack her suitcase and was running to her to give it to her. But Anna snatched it rudely from his hands. The girl thought that although she hadn't known her that long, her dismissal still made her sad enough. The girl understood that Anna's act was unforgivable, but remembering the Duke and Duchess, who publicly ignored their own son, Evelina realized that it was not at all surprising that the servants began to treat the young master accordingly. The more the protagonist remembered them, the more angry she became each time. But she was taken out of her thoughts by Anna. She held out to her the last piece of jewelry that hadn't been taken from her. Evelina took it gently and, holding it close to her heart, watched Anna remove herself from the mansion. Some more time passed, and then Evelina, quietly entering the room, inquired if the young gentleman was awake. When she saw that he turned his head toward her, she entered. Evelina came closer to Leandro's bed and told him that it was the same jewelry that Anna had tried to steal, but had returned it to her. Afterwards, she asked where she should put it. Leandro thought for a moment and then said that he did not need the jewelry, so the girl could sell it or keep it and wear it. Evelina was surprised, so she asked him if he meant it. She scrutinized the pendant. Then Leandro told her to take a closer look and said that it was expensive. That's why Anna had tried to steal it. And then, turning away from her, he told her to figure out what to do with him. The girl mentally noted that the boy was making a fuss about nothing again. Eventually, she was kicked out of the room and walked to her room in complete silence. The girl recognized that although the boy's parents were disgusting, it didn't cancel out their irresistible beauty, so remembering the boy from her dream, the girl wondered if the boy would grow up to be the same once his curse was gone. But the girl sadly realized that she would only be able to find out about it in a couple of years, when the boy would grow up and be saved by Eleanor's hands. Though the girl was still uneasy about this rescue and what it might eventually lead to. Morning came and the young gentleman was visited by the doctor, who was giving the young gentleman an examination. Leandro was clearly not happy about it and asked the doctor to stop, but he was not being cranky because of the pain, he was just fed up. Then the doctor smiled amicably and said that the boy looked much better since his last visit. And judging from his observations, the symbols were no longer causing him much pain and discomfort, and he added that he could confidently add that the symbols were somewhat fewer. But afterward, the doctor warned that although this was true, it could be a temporary phenomenon due to the fact that he had recently changed the formula of his medication. The girl looked at the boy unhappily and remarked that it was not in vain that she had been giving him medicine all this time. The boy noticed her displeased face, and so he made a funny face at her to make her feel less displeased. Or maybe it was to make her even angrier. Then Leandro went to the doctor and told him that at times he could see a little better. He asked if it was because of the medication he had prescribed. And then he said that even now he could see every wrinkle in the doctor's face. The one reported that this was excellent news, for it had been a very long time since he had prescribed any medication for the young gentleman's eyesight. The boy wondered then why then it could so suddenly start coming back now. The man hesitated and admitted that he could not answer his question with certainty, as his curse was not yet fully understood. The boy was clearly not happy. He frowned and then told the doctor that since he was a doctor, he should know everything. The man smiled at the displeased look on his face, and then said that he realized from his good mood that Leandro was recovering much better than he had expected. The girl listened to all this and pondered the fact that his eyesight had suddenly improved, as well as the curse had weakened. Evelina was happy about that, but worried that it was just empty hopes. If the novel is to be believed, his improvements cannot be long-lasting. Leander is destined to remain blind for another 4 years, and the symbols will continue to darken and spread through his body. The curse will continue to slowly eat away at his light from the inside out. When he thinks his days are numbered, he meets Eleanor and she becomes his hope. But in the end, the girl will prove to be the curse for him, which will turn out to be much stronger than before. The girl looked at Leandro with despair and realized that she should not harbor false hopes, because in a few months he would have a seizure and the boy would once again be on the brink of death. But despite all the girl's fears, Leandro's condition only rapidly improved, so much so that it became noticeable even to the girl herself. He used to be very aggressive, always yelling and chasing her away, But now he is already used to her help, and the protagonist has even started to accompany him regularly. But one day, when the girl was helping him to take a bath, she decided to tell him that she was leaving for a 2-day weekend. The boy turned around in surprise and asked what she meant. The girl explained that she understood that the young gentleman did not care about such trifles, but she just decided to warn him that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow he would be assisted by other servants. Then the indignant Leandro asked why the girl always decided everything on her own. She didn't understand his question and said that she didn't make her schedule by herself. But he stopped her and told her that it was not about that. And after scrutinizing her, Leandro asked why the protagonist thought he was indifferent to her. The girl didn't know how to answer his question, so she put it down. She clapped her hands happily and thought that she must be feeling as good as if the ever-eagle kitten had accepted the man as someone she could trust. From this clap, the foam from the girl's hands fell directly on the young gentleman's face, and the girl awkwardly apologized and reached out her hand to remove the foam from his face. But the boy gently intercepted her palm and stopped, and then explained that for him it is a small thing and the protagonist should stop treating him so carefully as if with a child. At this remark, Evelina wondered if she was really treating him like that. But the boy carefully looked at her face and said that she often behaved like that before and even now. The protagonist awkwardly reported that the young master does not care about a simple servant like her, so the girl and overexcited for joy. These were not her mere assumptions though. Leandro Velaviti aloof, silent, and melancholy, and Eleanor was the only one who'd get close to him. Then Leandro, looking at her, informed her that it built her less to decide for others. The girl awkwardly informed him that she wasn't going to decide anything for him at all, but thought she just knew his character, but she was well aware that she couldn't tell him that he was her favorite character from the novella, so she was well aware of his relationship with others. Then the protagonist rolled up her sleeves and promised that she wouldn't do it again, and afterwards suggested that she finish with the bathroom procedures as soon as possible. He sharply turned away from her, which made the girl laugh, and she thought that perhaps in this case his silence was a sign of agreement. Afterwards, Evelina warned him that she would quickly go and get his towel and come back. She also asked him to wait for a minute. When he was left alone, he blushed and was embarrassed by such behavior on the part of the protagonist. Some time had passed, and the girl had already returned to her room, admitting to herself that she was very tired after another busy day in the servant's life. But suddenly she was distracted by her pendant. She didn't know what she should do with it, because it looked too luxurious for a commoner, and it was obviously a very expensive piece of jewelry. The girl remembered how Leandro had suggested she keep the necklace or sell it, and thought that selling it sounded like a pretty good option. But then she gave up on the idea, because it was a gift from Leandro, and she decided she would keep it. Looking at the beautiful blue pebble, she thought it was a color that reminded her of the ocean. Evelina thought about what Leandro would be like when he grew up and wondered if the boy would have the same beautiful blue eyes when the curse was finally lifted from him. Afterward, the girl pressed the pendant to her heart and prayed to God that Leandro would be saved from his torment. Leandro had nightmares at night. He remembered how Princess Eleanor, who had come to their house, had called him a monster. In despair, the boy began to think of himself as such. Everyone around him was so dismissive of him because of something that wasn't even his fault. Even his own mother hated him. A child betrayed by his parents to avoid the pain of betraying someone else has become even more obnoxious. But then the weirdo maid showed up. The boy had no idea how much he wanted to feel someone else's warmth, but he was even more afraid that one day she too would start looking at him with the same contempt as the others. However, this was all not happening. Leandro is used to a life of sleep, medication, and agony. But the girl who appeared so suddenly changed his life completely. Her kind heart and warm hands healed much better than medicine. Leandro woke up to an excruciating pain in his head, and the first thing he did was reach for medicine to ease the agony. He tried to look at his watch indignantly to see what time it was, for Evelina should have been here long ago. He thought that perhaps she was still asleep, but then he remembered that the girl had warned him about her weekend yesterday. Leandro lay down on the bed and wondered what the girl might be doing now. He thought that she had probably left the estate and sadly decided that she should probably take a break from him. Remembering her face and bright smile, the boy admitted that as much as he himself was funny because he had not spent much time with Evelina, but for some reason he was very attached to her. Leandro remembered the warmth of her hands and put his hand on his aching head, as she had done earlier, to ease his agony. He thought that the girl would be gone for only 2 days, but for some reason they seemed like an eternity. 2 days of the protagonist's weekend had passed, and she headed to the young gentleman's room to bring him breakfast. But the boy didn't say anything to her, just watched her actions from the sidelines. Then Evelina went to the window to open his curtains to let the sun shine in and also to air out the room. Leandro, still disgruntled, just watched her without even intending to answer. Then the girl approached him and seeing his frowning face, she didn't know what she could do to help him. So she suggested that perhaps he wanted to change before he ate. The girl realized that Leandro was not in vain just looking in silent as if not happy to see her and decided that she had done something wrong. So she set his food down and offered him something to eat instead of ogling her like that. But Leandro slammed his hand on the table and turned away from the protagonist, saying that he had no appetite. The girl was obviously concerned about this behavior. The girl looked at him sadly and admitted that if he didn't eat, she would start crying, and then warned that if he did not eat breakfast, she would have to feed him. But to the protagonist's surprise, he agreed to it, and after blushing with embarrassment and awkwardness told Evelina to feed him herself. Then the girl looked at him and asked him if he had lost his hands during her 2 days off, but the still embarrassed boy stretched them out in front of him and said that his hands were very weak and had been for a long time, so he could not cope with such a task. Evelina looked at him, surprised at the change, and supposed that while she was away something serious might have happened to make him behave like that. But she didn't resist. While the girl was feeding Leandro, she noticed that he was eating very nicely and looked like a little chick. She smiled as she watched him and admitted to herself that it was the first time the boy looked so much like a normal child. She smiled as she watched him and admitted to herself that it was the first time the boy looked so much like a normal child. When Leandro ate, he called the main character to his bed and asked her to sit next to him. The girl was surprised but did not resist and sat down next to him. Then the boy wrapped his arm around her hand with his own and gently placed it on his forehead, and afterward asked the protagonist to stay by his side and not to move away from him anywhere. The girl watched him and didn't understand why he was acting so strangely, even stranger than usual. The girl watched him and understood why he was acting so strangely, even stranger than usual. The girl watched Leandro's face as she noticed that her hair was quite close to his face. She realized with horror that she might have woken him up like that, for she had forgotten to braid her hair before coming to him. But suddenly the boy smiled affectionately and told the protagonist that her hair tickled him. She remembered the quote from the novel, "When he was not with Eleanor, he always looked indifferent, frightening, or frowning." Evelina realized with delight that she had seen one of those smiles that were meant only for the protagonist of the novel. Evelina was happy enough just taking care of him, but she was glad that he was beginning to open up to her more and more. Eventually Leandro fell asleep and the girl, awkwardly sitting next to him, didn't realize how much time she had to hold his hand. When the boy woke up, the protagonist finally got up from her seat and was able to stretch because all the time she was sitting still. The young gentleman asked her what she had been doing all weekend, but she looked at Leandro with her violet eyes and smiled and said she was thinking of him. At such words the boy's heart skipped a beat and his nose turned conspiratorially red, showing embarrassment. To cover it up, he turned his back on her and told her she was lying. But the girl was not so simple. She grabbed him by the edge of his clothes and told him that she was as sincere as possible. Afterwards, she asked him why he didn't believe her at all. The boy looked at what she was doing with his nightgown and told her to stop stretching his clothes, and then grabbed the edge of it to snatch it away from the girl. But I think he overdid it. The girl fell right on top of him and managed to stop her fall just a few millimeters from his face. They stared into each other's eyes for a couple more seconds after what had happened, not knowing what to do. Then the girl quickly got up from him and, fixing her hair, was genuinely surprised. She added that the young gentleman had clearly gained strength during this time, but the boy still did not move a millimeter from what had happened. Leandro grabbed her by her apron and, blushing with embarrassment, asked her why she was smiling like that, explaining the smile when she covered her eyes and wrinkled her nose a little. And then, still red from the embarrassment of the situation, he asked her not to do it again. The girl, not understanding such a demand, wondered how anyone could be forbidden to smile at all. And the boy blushed, lay face down on the pillow and said he'd had enough of that. But he didn't continue and didn't explain what he meant. The protagonist sat down beside his bed on her knees and said that she would die of curiosity if he did not tell her, but when she was refused, sarcastically and resentfully said that the young gentleman had a wonderful disposition just comparable to a fairy tale. Then he turned a little towards her to be able to see her face and asked if she had really thought only of him during her weekend. She awkwardly rubbed her head and admitted that she was thinking, but of course she had other thoughts. And the man turned around unhappily and said that in such a situation she might as well have lied. And afterward, Leandro reached into her hair and gently squeezed it so as not to hurt her. And he kissed her, saying that he'd really been thinking about her all along. At that moment, his always dark and misty eyes shone brightly, and it was to the main character. The girl looked admiringly at the young gentleman and then reported that his eyes had changed. The boy looked at her excitedly and asked what had happened, and she said in amazement that they had turned bright blue, to which Leandro said that his eyes had always been that color. But the girl explained that they are much brighter than usual now, and then taking his face and gazing intently into his eyes excitedly inquired how well she could see him. The boy was obviously very embarrassed by this intimacy with the main character, and he blushed very red and his heart was racing. Then he pulled away from her and told her that he had always seen her well and said he could even see the blackheads on her face. The girl approached him and told him that it was very rude to say that, especially since she didn't have that many of them, and then admitted that since he had noticed them, his eyesight was really fine. And then she thought about it and began to wonder what could have caused this change. And then she wondered if Leandro had been taking his medication all this time. But he calmly said that he had already explained to Evelina 100 times that his medication was not helping. Then the girl asked what other explanation there could be for such a sudden change. He looked and thought about it and explained to the protagonist that it had happened before. She agreed and remembered that the last time it had happened was when he had kicked her out. The boy coughed awkwardly, obviously not wanting to remember. Evelina looked at the young gentleman carefully, clearly admiring his eyes, which were indeed bright blue as she had expected. But their color was much more intense than she had imagined. But suddenly the girl jumped up. Leandro, watching her run away, asked where she was in such a hurry, but Evelina said she wanted to look in the dressing room. She brought a huge mirror and placed it beside the boy's bed and afterward suggested that he see for himself. But to the protagonist's surprise, he was not happy. He seemed shocked and horrified by what he saw. The girl explained that earlier his eyes had been cloudier, but now they were really very light. The boy turned away from his reflection and asked the protagonist to remove that mirror as soon as possible. The girl, seeing the boy shaking, immediately realized that she had done something really bad. She had been so happy to see Leandro's eyes heal that she hadn't thought of that reaction. When she returned, she went to his bed and asked him to turn around and talk to her. The protagonist was very worried to see the boy depressed. Seeing that he was wrapped in a blanket and unresponsive, the girl assumed that he was hiding, and then not knowing what to do, she decided to ask if she should leave him alone. At this question, the boy's eyes opened wide in shock. He thought he disgusted her since he saw something horrible in the reflection, and then told the protagonist that he was indeed a monster and that this was the perfect description for him. The girl tried to deny it, but Leandro interrupted her and ordered him not to lie because he realized that the girl thought he was a monster. The boy reflected that it had been a very long time since he had seen his reflection and at that moment made sure that he looked really nightmarish. Leandro cried quietly, not understanding why the girl had put up with him for so long despite his obvious ugliness, and then he said that she could be free to go because eventually she, like the others, would refuse to serve someone like him. The girl excitedly explained that she didn't want to leave him at all and that she would never do such a thing. But the boy simply explained that he didn't want to hear it, but she didn't give up. She grabbed his blanket and grudgingly told him to stop interrupting her and to listen normally because she hadn't finished talking. The boy emotionlessly asked for his blanket back. But then the girl looked at him determinedly and asked the boy to turn around and look at her face. She sincerely reported that she didn't think he was gross or disgusting. But the man got very angry and ordered her to stop lying to him. Then the girl took off her shoes and started to climb into his bed. She said she really felt that way, and then asked if she could be with him otherwise. She sadly informed him that he was chasing her away because of the unfortunate mirror and all after they had gotten close. He looked at her like an angry wildcat and asked her why she was talking to him like that. Then the girl, to his great shock and embarrassment, to his heart's pain, bent over him to examine his face and interrogated what he meant and what he didn't like about her manner of speaking. He moved away from her abruptly, but the girl didn't give up and started to crawl closer. Leandro asked her not to come any closer, but Evelina noticed that he was asking her too late because she had already gotten close. The girl looked at him intently, but suddenly Leandro shouted that he was ordering her to stay away. The girl cried and didn't understand why he was ordering her to leave. She said that he had always been very rude and cruel to her, and it hurt her incredibly. The boy panicked and tried to calm her down. It hurt him to see her crying. Then he called her by name, and the girl smiled radiantly as she noticed that he was calling her by name. He shuddered at this change of emotion. He shuddered at the change of emotion, and then grudgingly noted that she had been faking it all along. The girl laughed and then took his hands in hers, and looking at him happily, she said that it was the first time he had ever addressed her simply as Evelina. The boy, in shock, not knowing how to behave, asked if it made her so happy, and she confirmed his words without hiding. Then the boy looked at her with wide open eyes and asked if he really didn't disgust her at all, and asked if she could stay with him forever. The girl promised that she would stay with him as long as he wished and smiled back at him. The protagonist knew that as soon as Eleanor freed him from the curse, Leandro would follow her and he would no longer need the girl. But until then, she would always be there for him. The boy gently wrapped his arms around her and told her that no one had pulled her tongue, and then thought that Evelina should fulfill her promise to stay with him forever. Every day the boy began to get worse. Now sitting on the bed he threw up. The main character gently stroked his back and asked how he was feeling. He apologized guiltily and said he was really trying to hold back. The girl looked sadly at his face and realized that he had been putting up with her all this time. He had nothing to apologize for. The girl stood beside him without moving away and realized that she only believed he was getting better. But a few days ago, his condition worsened dramatically, and his previously bright blue eyes had darkened again and lost their luster. Every night the boy suffered from fever and had to take more and more medicine and sleeping pills than before. The girl carrying him water to apply the compress realized that she was not harboring false hopes, but at this rate, Leandro was about to face the most life-threatening seizure of his life. The girl cried from helplessness, though she knew it would happen, but still she could not help him in any way. But suddenly she was brought out of her digging by the faint voice of Leander, who asked why her eyes were wet. He smiled at her with the gentlest smile, and the girl knew that reading a novel could never convey how beautiful that tortured smile was. The girl cried from the realization that now he was smiling not from happiness, but just wanted her not to worry about him. Leandro smiled exhaustedly and announced that he wanted to go for a walk when his fever was over. The protagonist was happy about this idea and offered him a walk in the garden, as now there are wonderful flowers blooming and everyone is delighted with them. The girl put a compress on him and told him that the rainy season was over, so it was very hot outside, but Leandro said with a smile that he couldn't stand the heat. Evelina smiled and suggested we go for a walk in the evening. She also noticed that the heat was bearable since they were in the north. The boy took off the compress and looked at her and smiled, and then happily told her that they had a beach house in the south and offered Evelina to go there with him when he got better. She smiled and said that it was customary to take her lovers to such places, not servants like her. At this remark, Leandro only grudgingly grimaced and said he didn't want to go anywhere else. Evelina laughed when she saw this and remarked that the young gentleman was hard to please.